she's going beast mode here, right? And she's got some Second Amendment things hanging from her shoulders. She's got some guns ready to go, right? Like, she is not to be messed with here. Again, our translations downplay this. And yet, even with all the effort to downplay a lot of this, I still don't know how you read Proverbs 31 and get anything other than this individual is unbelievable.
Hello, and welcome to the Ancient Jesus Future Faith podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Tana Sheaver, and I am here with my co-hosts, Sarah Minardi.
Hello.
And Don Sheaver.
Wait, I'm not a host?
I said co-hosts.
Oh, okay. Hey.
Plural.
Yes, my co-host, Sarah, and then this guy who just showed up.
That's fair.
And was like, you're talking about women today.
I have opinions.
I have thoughts.
I have insights.
Oh, that was a great beginning to this. That was perfect.
Yeah, I think I'm going to leave now.
So anyway, today we're going to talk about Proverbs 31. You know, that passage that they always trot out on Mother's Day at churches and somehow use as like a prescriptive formula for how a woman should be a submissive wife that takes care of the household. But we're going to dig into that today and talk about why that is kind of ridiculous.
Oh, I didn't realize that's what this was about. I just read, it is not for kings. It is not for kings to drink wine or for rulers to take strong drink, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed. Give strong drink to the one who is perishing and wine to those in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more.
Well, we were going to talk about that first. I was getting to that.
But I stop at that point. That's when I stop reading because I have to go grab a beer.
So actually, I did want to talk a little bit about that first, just because I think it is interesting that we're always like, a Proverbs 31 woman.
Listen, this is how we misinterpret Proverbs 31 so badly is we start drinking in verse 4.
But yes, in this part, the mother of King, I'm not sure if it's Lemuel, I'm just going to say it that way, is giving him advice on how to be a king. And she's saying, oh, it's not for you to drink wine. Like, rulers need to be, they have their senses about you. But it is interesting that there are some verses here that say, give strong drink to the one who is perishing and wine to those in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. That part I just kind of think is funny because there's so many religions that are against drinking, and here they're like, let the poor drink. But it goes on to say, speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of all the destitute. Speak out, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. So anyway.
Yeah, we don't hear about the Proverbs 31 man.
Right.
But here it is. And to have, those verses, like, it just, to basically cherry pick Proverbs 31, 10, the women part, and never talk about this part, it's like, and also just how we approach Proverbs in general, I think, is all like indicated by this, because Proverbs, it's a whole book of not quite poetry, but stating general truths, using metaphors. I don't know if that's the right word, like lady wisdom and things like this. But it's like all of a sudden we get to 31:10, and now we have something that's prescriptive.
Yeah.
That is the ideal woman. And even like in my translation in the notes, it says, while Proverbs chapters 1-9 describe the virtues of the symbolic lady wisdom, this passage, meaning starting at verse 10, celebrates the ideal flesh and blood wife.
Nah.
And I'm like, what?
This is why I don't recommend Bibles with built-in study guides.
Yeah, I know you don't, but I just like read that. I'm like, it's like, oh my goodness, like, hot, like, it's just so like, this is one book, and it's really more accurate, I think, to consider like how the beginning is written when you read the end, not to be like, well, the beginning's written one way, but we really like what this says at the end, so let's just make this. And we're not so sure about what it says here in verse 6 about giving beer to one who is dying, so let's just never talk about that. And we'll just focus here, and the rest of this is good, though.
I think they're talking about man flu.
Perishing is man flu.
I die at least 3 times a year with man flu.
Yeah. But it is really a shame because those beautiful verses that you read in 8:9, speak up for those who have no voice, for the justice of all who are dispossessed, speak up, judge righteously, and defend the cause of the oppressed and needy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, that's like such an inspiring call to man and woman.
Yeah.
And we'll see that fulfilled in the later portion of Proverbs 31 about how she deals with
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
these things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to also say Proverbs 8, talking about Lady Wisdom, John almost verbatim quotes referring to Jesus.
Really?
Yeah. He says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And that is almost verbatim to Proverbs 8, I think right at the very beginning of Proverbs 8, where it talks about from the beginning, the world was created through wisdom, through Lady Wisdom. John uses this imagery of Lady Wisdom to define Jesus, which again, I just love because again, it points to some of the gender role ideals that have come out of more conservative Christendom, Western Christendom, that just doesn't seem to bother or engage the writers of the text in the same way. So,
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, because like Lady Wisdom is Lady Wisdom from what I understand, because the Hebrew word is feminine,
Yes.
the word for wisdom.
correct.
So it's really not meant to be womanly or
Right.
suggesting that, just more connected to the word and the gender of the word.
Yeah.
And people would in general probably more agree that throughout Proverbs, the ideas of Lady Wisdom could be applied to man or woman.
Right. But I think that term is Sophia. I think
Okay.
Sophia is and that becomes a more typical feminine name.
Sure.
Yeah. And then you get the Proverbs 31:10, like, oh, this is just for the ladies.
Just for the women.
Yeah.
Although men would be lucky to live the life that this woman lives. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Like males would be lucky. This woman in Proverbs 30. Let's just do it. Let's get to it because this person's pretty magnificent.
Well, I was reading last night and I was talking about how wisdom is the theme throughout Proverbs and that it ends because this is the last proverb, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
And-
correct. Before
and
we
it's
get to Ecclesiastes, yeah.
So it ends with like, here is Lady Wisdom
Embodied.
personified,
Yes.
like kind
Yeah.
of a thing.
Love it.
Yeah. So I kind of want to start with, if you all don't mind, I'm not sure which word in the English here it is, but the Hebrew is, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this probably, Eshet Chayil.
The capable. Well, my translation says capable
Right.
in verse 10.
And
Mine says excellent.
and
Totally excellent.
Or a wife of noble character, I think is a common translation there. Sorry.
Yeah. There's
clarify.
all kinds of different ones, but how? So, I love the writings of Rachel Held Evans, and she did a whole book on biblical womanhood, but she also wrote about it a lot in her blog, and she her way of translating it was woman of valor.
Yeah.
And that became like a big thing for her actually, was somebody would do something and then she would say the Hebrew, like the Hebrew version, which I don't want to mispronounce. So I'm just going to say woman of valor. She'd be like, woman of valor, and it was like her thing. And here's my one like little celebrity meet and greet brag. I got to meet her. She spoke at a church in Blacksburg when I was living there. And I had just finished my master's degree, and I told her about a research project I did on women preachers. And so we got to talking about it, and it was so wonderful. I got to sit there and talk with her for like several minutes about this research project, and she was so interested in it. And then she called me that. She was like, Ashet Hayil, or whatever, and like at that moment I was like, super into her. So I was like, oh my gosh, she called me a woman of valor.
I felt that pride just now when you said this.
Yeah.
So that was like, that's my little,
Rightly so.
My
You were
brag.
called rightly so.
Yeah, and she followed me on Twitter. So so anyway, so I loved reading about all the things about biblical womanhood that Rachel Held Evans would write. And so this woman of valor thing, I think is very, very interesting, because to me that feels very different than Ode to a Capable Wife, which is what my pericope is.
Yeah.
Capable wife versus woman of valor, because capable wife automatically limits, like, you know what I mean, boxes that person in to wifely duties. So anyway, that was the thing I wanted to start off with.
Great.
Sorry. I also wanted to say that this, I'm curious about, we often talk about things that are descriptive versus prescriptive. And this is descriptive. And I feel like we often use it in a prescriptive way, but we also don't even use it properly in a prescriptive way. So to just pick one part, verse 26 says, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. And to me, I'm like, that's saying that women can speak, not this whole women shouldn't speak thing.
Well, nothing about this section, like, to me, I'm trying to go back through the catalog of sermons I've heard around this. Mm-hmm. Because reading this passage, I don't know how it ever could be taught to be submissive.
Yeah.
Or to have a secondary role.
Yeah.
This section is so powerful that to me, I go, how could this ever be taught in such a way that diminishes the role of women and egalitarianism, if not even flip it the other direction, that men are subservient, right? Like, it begins with saying the heart of her husband trusts in her, right?
Yes.
That he puts his faith in her, right? That is often how the more conservative church would speak about women with their husband, is that you have to put your faith in your husband. Mm-hmm. Here, it begins with saying the husband puts his faith in her.
And I was reading back on some of Rachel Held Evans' teachings, and she said that it is in the Jewish tradition, it is the men who memorize Proverbs 31 so they know how to honor their wives, which I think is very interesting.
I'm sorry. I haven't memorized it
yet. Glenn has.
I don't doubt that.
Parts of it.
I have no doubt about
My
that.
husband.
But that's the only, one of the things she also says is like, that's the only, I didn't write it down, so now I can't remember exactly how she worded it, but basically the only instruction in Proverbs 31 is to the man. Everything else is just describing the woman.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, yeah, you're right. She makes things, she sells things. She's
a business owner.
Yeah.
An entrepreneur.
Yeah.
A successful business owner.
And she gives. She opens her hand to the poor, reaches out her hand to the needy.
And this is there. Yeah.
Yeah, and back to your point about like, and I can't find where it is now, and I didn't write a note about it, but there's something in here too that like the Hebrew word would suggest like fighting or war or like something like bow or arrow or something like that kind of like strength behind it. And I can't figure out which verse it is, but that same idea about like this amazing strength behind it.
I just love that the whole section is like, and she does, and she does, and she does. And it says, and the husband sits.
Yeah.
Right.
I
now,
mean...
now, in all fairness, it does say the husband is known in the gates.
Right.
Which means that he is rubbing elbows with leadership of the city.
Right.
Right. So it does still hold the male as having some level of influence and power in the city. But it seems kind of like, Tana, help me out here. Who was it that on Walden's Lake or whatever, that his mom brought him lunch every day?
Thoreau.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, it makes
She
it
was
up.
like...
Well, say the whole thing, because I think the whole thing's powerful, because he plays it off as if...
But he was like out like
Yeah.
miles away, like, right? But he was only like
20 minutes or
20
something
minutes.
like that from
mom.
his mom and I think sister. And they like brought him food and did his laundry and all this stuff.
So, right. So what gave him the privilege of being able
Yeah.
to go out and set aside this time to think, to ponder, to write what is beautiful literature was because of women of valor.
Yes.
And I would say the same thing is true here, that he is able to sit in the gates because of the woman of valor.
Yes. And that is actually something that has been just like a little irking thing for me for so long is, I think we're getting better at it now, but there would be certain men who would be like maybe local politicians. I'm sure on the higher levels as well, but I'm thinking more locally, like local politicians or like leaders who have advanced to executive levels or whatever. And people would be like, man, this guy's so great. And that's and like almost all of them had stay-at-home wives. And I'm like, you realize that you are capable of doing this stuff because your wife is at home taking care of the household and your kids. And I feel like that gets washed over so much.
Yeah. I want to say that all of my study over the years, all the time that I've been able to commit to scripture is because of the woman of valor in my life, right? Tana has been the breadwinner for 90% of our marriage. In order that I had time to disciple people, I had time to study, I had time to be a pastor, because unlike some pastors, I never seemed to find that sweet job that allowed me to afford
Right.
anything above a Volkswagen Rabbit and not a new one. And so because of that, I often, people will be like, oh, I wish I had the ability, or I wish I knew the text as well. The only reason I know the text as well as I do is because Tana has provided for our household and taken care of the huge amount of effort. I think when Rachel Held Evans referred to you as a woman of valor, if she only knew, right, how much more. So,
Any thoughts, Sarah?
that's a good place for us to end.
I'm good. See y'all.
Yeah, and like when I approach this text, I kind of see it as like more of like a poem or like an overarching thing too. Like it's like, if we often like women like say that like, it's really overwhelming to like read all this, but like we have to come at it at a lens that's realizing it's like almost like a Mother's Day card with a long poem on it about like all the wonderful things that like mom
That
is.
you
But like,
do, yeah.
it's not really every single day that like everything is great and cheery or all these things are happening at the same time. Or that maybe even that it's all like the same woman, but like more I read it as like a list of things that could be described as a woman of valor or a capable woman, not necessarily that's all like as one. But it's interesting because like when it's like talked about, I don't think I have ever heard anybody really emphasize the last verse.
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, it seems like, the last verse, like the last thing you say is what you want people to walk away with, right? Mm-hmm. And like, does anybody even really remember what the last verse of Proverbs 31 is? But Proverbs 31:31 is give her the reward of her labor and let her works praise her at the city gates.
Yeah.
So it's like, all the times like teaching on this, like And that seems to be the heart of it, you know?
Yeah.
And again, city gates is the leadership of the city. Like, this again is so important, because it's not just like that people know of her as they enter the city. It's that the leadership in the city sings her praises.
Yeah.
So whether it's the husband sitting in the city gates who's offering those praises, or it's the city knows of this individual, and the city's grateful that this individual is a resident, and this woman even has authority or power in those spaces. It's also unbelievably good.
Yeah, it's just so, you read it, like, actually the difference between hearing it taught and actually reading it just feels so vast. And I realize that's the case for a lot of things that because we're uncovering the original, what things meant in the original Hebrew or Greek, and what the context of the day. And so we have a lot of those discoveries with passages in our podcast and our studies over time. But this one just feels so stark to me, and maybe it's just because it's about women. But anyway, sorry, you looked like you were going to say something.
I also want to just bring up the verse prior to that one, verse 30. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. I think that this one is part of the verses that get twisted, right? But here's what I would argue is being said here, is that women aren't to be like trophy wives.
Yeah.
That's not their role on this planet. Their role is not to just be charming. Their role is not to just be pretty, something nice to look at. Mm-hmm. Their role is so much more significant than that. And this is actually God encouraging women that their appearance and their behavior, like I'm trying to think of the right word, because, and the two of you will know this way better than I do, but, an angry man is, a man's called angry, but a woman is called bitchy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A man is called determined, and a woman is called nagging.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that part is where I think about with the charm piece, right? That your job isn't to fit the expectations of personality or expectation of behavior. Be yourself, because all you need to do is have trust in God. You don't need to appeal to men.
Yeah, when I was reading that last night, I immediately thought about Mark Driscoll, because he was always like going on and on about his hot wife, and he basically,
well, hot wife is a mega church.
It's such a mega church thing, but he in particular would always go on about like basically how women shouldn't let themselves go. And then there's lots of religious leaders and pastors and otherwise who would insinuate that, it was a woman's fault if a man had an affair or whatever, because she let herself go. And that it was like almost like part of the wifely duties to remain attractive. And in their definition, attractive also meant skinny, And I read this and I'm like, wow, I'm just going to have that locked and loaded for the next time I hear that. Because I'm trying to think if there's anything anywhere else in the Bible that would even give that idea, that it's like biblical that a wife should be hot.
Well, we even discussed in the Rebecca podcast we did that she did not most likely fit the gender norms of a woman, yet was considered beautiful. Right. That the Bible doesn't have the same maybe expectations as Cosmo.
Yeah. Well, and even like the verse we just read about, this woman is praised because she fears the Lord, praised at the city gate, or praised for her works. Let her works praise her. Just that idea of like, that's the thing that we should be praising about women. And, I feel like the hot wife thing like comes from a place of wanting to like honor marriage and like like praise the wife, but it just is like so far past, it's just like inappropriate, you know, like it just doesn't make sense. Like even like compared to this, it's just gross.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm not saying even like, I'm not trying to like say Mark Driscoll's coming from a good place, but like I feel like besides Mark Driscoll that like some guys think that that is like the honorable thing to do, to say that.
Right.
Like they think that they're honoring their wife.
Well, and I think you're correct. I can think about times in my life where saying that I think that my wife is beautiful is the kind thing to say, or the honoring thing to say. But I think we've all been socialized in some way to do that, right? I think about when we see girls, minors, girls, that will often say, we'll talk about their appearance when we describe them. I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with saying that a child is adorable or beautiful or any of those things. Our problem is we stop.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily a problem to say, I have a hot wife. Maybe I do. I don't know. That feels weird in certain settings. But regardless, I don't think it's necessarily inherently wrong to say I have a beautiful spouse. I think what happens is when we end there, that we've reduced the virtues of our spouse to just the appearance is where the harm really comes in, if it's never stated otherwise. If intelligence and courage and compassion and all the things listed here
Right.
never end up in that list,
Yeah.
that's a huge problem. And for most of us in churches, especially if you were a part of the megachurch movement, you have probably heard a male pastor refer to their spouse as beautiful, hot, good looking, babe, whatever.
Oh, Jerry Falwell from Liberty University used to do that all the time too.
Yeah, well, Jerry, we found out that
Yeah,
never mind, it doesn't matter. But I don't know that I remember a time, and I'm not saying it never happened, but clearly it didn't happen enough that it's memorable, that it was ever talked about more than just their appearance.
Yeah. And I feel like hot is even more like gross than beautiful, because
Yes.
like in
Yes.
my mind, like beautiful can encompass like the beautiful things that you do and
can
that
be
you
interior,
are.
yeah.
But like hot also just to me, like, and maybe this is just a weird like interpretation, but isn't it really like it is taking it from like the eyes of the person that's saying it? Like, I think you're hot. You make me hot.
Yeah,
You
it's
arouse
sexual. Yeah.
pleasure in me. And in some weird way, it becomes like about, so it's like admitting that like, that just all like makes it weird.
Well, it
like,
completely reduces a woman to
Yes,
serving
that's what I
the
was gonna-
man.
yeah.
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 Like my wife is hot, which means I get to have the sex I want. And then
Mm-hmm.
also she is fulfilling her duty to procreate, you know?
Not
Yeah.
even necessarily procreate.
Well, but I think that's one of the things people point, like a lot of these religious guys will point to, is basically like you're a sex factory and a baby factory, like and
Right.
clean my house. You
and
know?
look at how much emphasis is put on like her business. You know, like there's
Oh
so
my
many
gosh,
things like
yeah.
the works that she's doing is like verse 13 through 19, 21 to 22, 24 and 27. And then we get one verse about helping the poor and needy, one verse about loving instruction, one verse about fearing the Lord. And the only way where kids get mentioned, besides like maybe over the activities of her household, is that her sons rise up and bless her. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's just like, when you actually read what's here, it's not the baby making factory
Right.
that like people who want to populate the world with their belief systems would have you think.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that another thing from Rachel Held Evans that I read last night was that a lot of people will take this verse, and because there is that verse, like her children rise up and call her happy, or, you know, whatever. they will kind of grab that and be like, see, a good wife, a capable wife, blah, 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 has children, you know, like there's like, that is one of like the requirements. Right. And she points out that Ruth, the Bible describes Ruth using that same Hebrew phrase, and it's while she's childless.
Yep.
It's while she's husbandless.
Yep.
And she is called a woman of valor.
Yes.
And I love that.
Yeah, that's really important.
Can either of you or both of you, I know you can, will either of you be willing to read how your verse 17 is written?
Mm-hmm.
I have, she draws on her strength and reveals that her arms are strong.
I have, she girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong.
Okay, what translations are you guys using?
I'm on the New Revised Standard Version, anglicized.
Okay.
This is Holman Christian Standard.
Okay, so I want to show you right now
Yeah.
how Bibles and translations have bias.
Yeah.
So I'm reading from the ESV, which is Reformed tradition. So John Piper, Mark Driscoll.
Oh,
Right.
right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it tends to not put women in power. I don't believe most Reformed churches allow women to be
Teachers.
a preacher, a pastor. At least not in the John Piper, Mark Driscoll land of things. Mm-hmm. This one says she dresses herself and with strength and makes her arms strong. The actual Hebrew is she girds her loins, right? Which is so different than she dresses herself, right? She girds her loins. Like when you guys think of girding your loins, what do you think of?
I don't actually know what that means.
Is this the part where like that'd be like preparing to, like for battle?
Yeah, like
Okay, that
something
might-
really
yeah.
difficult, something extremely hard. You would gird your loins before you did it. Like I would imagine Daniel before going into the lion's den girded his loins. So like anytime we read this idea of girding your loins, it means to prepare for something epic, something big, right? So even I would argue, Tana, yours comes a little bit closer.
Yeah.
But even yours, Sarah, downplays a little bit this idea that she's going beast mode here. Right? And she's got some Second Amendment things hanging from her shoulders. She's got some guns ready to go, right? Like she is not to be messed with here. Like, and again, our translations downplay
Yeah.
this. Mm-hmm. And yet, even with all the effort to downplay a lot of this, I still don't know how you read Proverbs 31 and get anything other than this individual is unbelievable.
Right.
And nobody lives up to this individual. No, not a single human being on this planet lives up to this individual.
Yeah. And this is right after she planted a vineyard.
And I would believe it if it said by herself.
Yeah. Yeah. It does say my version says with the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. But yeah.
So one thing, and I think I think we kind of made it clear earlier, but someone's fruit, like again, this goes back to other episodes where we talked about where we spiritualize things. And we say a person's fruit is their compassion and love. And because the text does talk about those things, right? But the fruit, you can tell someone, like in the Gospels, it says, a false teacher by their fruits, right?
Yeah.
It's by the way they live their life. Like you might not know a false teacher by what they preach from the pulpit or what they talk about. They might do that really well. But you know who they really are if you investigate their life and you look at the way they live. Their life will tell you whether or not they are a false teacher. So does their character match what they're saying from the pulpit, basically? This is that same thing that she considers a field and buys it. With the effort and her character, she plants a vineyard. Right? right? Not that she had fruit laying around, she planted the fruit and that became the vineyard. But her efforts and the way that she lives her life is what gave her the ability to then plant this vineyard. It's also then what we see in 31, like Sarah brought up, that it's the fruits of her hands. It's the way that she lived her life that gives her praise in the gate.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if we've already said everything we want to say about this.
Oh,
Is
no, I
there
have so much more.
Okay. Because there was a pause and I was like, okay, are we done?
Well, I feel like the unfortunate way that we approached it is that we just scattershotted
Scattershotted.
this whole thing.
That's
like,
true.
We didn't
Yeah.
go through it. We were like,
We
and
didn't
this
go-
one and this
Yeah.
one. And
We didn't go verse by verse. Yeah.
And because I think that what's also beautiful is, do you remember a parable that Jesus tells that would play into some of this? I love like the Jeopardy music that Tana was playing there.
I don't know.
Any guesses or thoughts, Tana? Verse 18.
Verse 18. Is it okay? I was going to say something about the lamp not going out at night. Is that with the like, yeah.
Right. And again, when I think it's important for us to kind of understand and recognize the context of things, right? Is that, in that parable that Jesus is telling, is that they wait for the groom.
The groom, yeah.
And their light does not burn out. Like they have enough oil that their lamp doesn't burn out, right? We again take that verse or that passage and make it, again, subservient women sitting around hoping for their man to show up. But that's not how you keep your lamp lit. You keep your lamp lit by being a woman of valor, right? And so Jesus, I would argue that Jesus is referencing, if not particularly Proverbs 31, the concept behind it is the people who are there when the groom arrives are people who the fruit of their hand plants a vineyard, who the fruit of their hand, like that. It's not people just sitting around waiting and made sure they had a couple extra things of oil, but instead it's this picture in Proverbs 18.
Yeah. The only critique I have is that it sounds like she's just like up all day and all night doing stuff. Like, just like, how is she not tired?
That's your.
That's my critique of this passage.
Well, this is where if it's descriptive, it's okay. If it's prescriptive, it's not.
Right.
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 Like this individual may not need sleep.
Maybe. And I do kind of wonder if to an extent that constant busyness is also misinterpreted and used against women. Because being the person who has the greatest responsibility for the household in certain perceptions of, how heterosexual marriages play out. That's not a job you leave. That's not a 9 to 5 you leave and then like go home and So a stay-at-home mom, for example, doesn't, it's not like your kids like okay kids, I'm done. Like, I'm just gonna stop now. Like, that just goes on. And then there's all the other things that typically fall onto the woman. And so I could see this being like, oh, she does this, she does this, she does this. And she, she takes care of everything and everyone. And so, ladies don't complain. And and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I've heard men make the argument that because if they're in like a more traditional household where like the woman is either staying home or working and the man is working the 9 to 5, like, well, I got home, now it's time for me to relax because I had a busy day, even if the woman also has a full-time job.
Well, we see that like 1950s TV shows, Leave It to Beaver, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Like the husband comes home, smokes the pipe, reads the
his
newspaper, while the wife always has an apron on and is always scurrying about doing things, right? Or
has dinner on the table ready.
like, and actually what came to my mind first when you started talking about that was what was the Dennis the Menace, the cartoon. Almost every scene, the dad's sitting smoking a pipe, reading a newspaper on a chair.
Yeah.
Mom has a frilly apron
Yeah.
on and is doing something in the kitchen, and Dennis is getting in trouble, right? Like it is absolutely portrayed that way all the time in media. I think more recent television series like sitcoms and stuff will see more. It is more often that we will see the woman relaxing and maybe even the man doing something in the background.
Yeah.
But it's been portrayed that way very much. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, like this could be weaponized against women in this way, but the awesomeness about praising the woman and all she does is it feels like it gives women their due for all they do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It might even be intentional in some ways to let us sit and go, how is that possible?
Right.
Right? Because I think that and I'd like to imagine that current men tend to be more active and participatory in the household. But I think that if men took on the role that has typically been expected of women to handle, that men would quickly say, how do you get all that done?
Yeah.
How do you possibly get all this done, maintain all this, and maintain any level of I don't know,
Sanity.
sanity? Yes, thank you.
There's this book and then a card deck that came out
I was
attached
just
to the
thinking
book.
of that. Yeah.
Fair Play.
Yeah.
Oh,
where
really?
It's called Fair Play, and the cards have all of the responsibilities of a household. And I was just watching this video the other day of a woman who had read the book, and then she like eventually passed the book on to her husband. But she said, I thought this was so interesting. She said she didn't want to pass the book on to her husband because she was afraid that he would see that she wasn't doing as much as him. And he was like, what? And so they sat down and they did the cards. And what you do is like, oh, this is the thing that I typically take care of. And you put the card in front of you. And oh, this is something you do, you know. And he showed their stacks that they came up with. And they had like a shared stack. But then like his stack was really small and her stack was really big. And I just thought I think there's a lot of that perception that is difficult to have conversations between men and women in heterosexual marriages about that division of labor.
Yeah, and I feel like I haven't read the book, but I had a friend recommend it to me and talk to me about it. But I think one of the other interesting aspects about it is that they break it down too into the mental load. Like it's not just like
who has to remember to send out birthday cards, stuff
right.
like that.
Yeah, so it's like, and then when you eventually get down to like dividing the responsibilities, it's like who remembered, like you said, the birthday cards, who bought the birthday cards, who sent the birthday cards, like breaking it even down like that, because like not just who took the kid to the doctor's appointment, but who just remembered that it was the time that they need to go to the doctor, who called and made and scheduled it. Like there's so much that goes on into these simple tasks that
I don't want to do this game. I'm really good at cards, but I have a feeling I would suck at this one. I think I would suck at this one.
But it really gets at that mental and emotional labor that women do that doesn't often go as recognized. And so I think when sometimes when men and women initially sit down to have a conversation, they're like, well, I feel like it's 50-50. I feel like it's fair. They're only looking at like certain kind of larger, more visible tasks.
Sure.
Whereas it's not like considering like, well, I'm always the one that remembers, like you said, like to schedule the dentist cleaning or, you know, all that stuff.
You know, it was probably only about 7 or 8 years ago, Tana, while you were doing your PhD, that it finally broke through my thick skull about the mental load, right? Like because Tana, would ask for more help around the home. And I was like, just make me a list. And if you give me a list, I'll do whatever is on that list. And Tana would be like, why do I have to make you a list? And I'm like, well, clearly I can't see it for myself. So just make me a list. And at that time, I really thought I was being helpful. Like, I genuinely did. I was like,
I'll do the list. What's wrong
I'm
with
like,
that?
you can make the list as long as you want, and I'll do this stuff. But I would say that in the same way that women have been socialized to take on a lot of responsibilities, I was clearly, because I would like to imagine I have done hard work in trying to do better, to break down a lot of the expectation, gender roles, everything. I've done a lot of hard work to do that, but that was a huge blind spot for me that I couldn't even comprehend. Like, to me, it wasn't like I was just being obstinate about it. Tana would be like, why should I have to make a list? And I'm like, isn't making a list easier than doing this stuff? Like, I just couldn't wrap my brain around it. And I think I think that a book like this and a card stacking thing, I know it's not a game, but a card demonstration like this can be really powerful for men. I think that it will also be very humbling.
When I was watching that video, I thought, how many men would be willing to do this, though?
Well, I think that there's a few things that go into fear, and I think it's in anything that you find out that you've been wrong.
Right.
It's the gloating. It's the told you so's that the pride just does not want to deal with. And I think that's across the board for so many things, but men particularly, again, socialize that you're always right. You're strong, you're reasonable, all these things. And when you get it pointed out to you how unreasonable and how wrong you've been, any knowing look from your spouse in that moment is going to be like a gut punch that I don't think guys want to have.
Yeah, I think that, and I also think there's a lot. I would say that we're still in a period where a lot of adult men grew up in households where the woman was
Their mom did
everything. And so that, even if the parents didn't intend that gets ingrained unless they have explicit conversations with the kids, I think, that gets ingrained. And there's this intuitive feeling, I think, that a lot of us get about certain things, about whether they're right or wrong, or they feel good or whatever. And I think it honestly keeps us a lot from critical thinking, because we're just like, well, that's wrong, or, whatever. And I think that's part of what's at play here, is that the men intuitively are like, whether they're thinking about it or not, like really deeply thinking, it's just like, well, that's just how things are. That's women do the cleaning, and and it's hard to, I think it's hard to get past that sort of intuitive feeling.
Yeah.
Does that make sense at all to you?
I wasn't intuiting it. And I think it's passages like this that help build that bedrock, right? That's really hard to chip away at, that the skill at which it takes to teach Proverbs 31 and make it out to be less than what it is on just a simple reading.
Well, and that's that intuitive thing again, the simple reading. And I think this is one of the most difficult uphill battles we face. Those of us who are trying to say there's bad in translations of Bibles, there's bad interpretations of passages that have been taught for hundreds of years now, or even just like the more recent evangelical movement of the last 50 years. People grew up with these teachings. And again, the simple English reading of their Bible, especially if it's a translation that favors, the more like complementarian view or something, you have to break through that. And I just think that's super difficult. And as an example for myself, when I started moving more and like learning more, and moving more away from like a more conservative thing, I actually went to a church where there was a woman preaching, and I was like, this feels wrong. And like, just because it had been so ingrained in me that women don't teach.
And also the cadence is different. Mm-hmm. The whole tone approach is often different.
Yeah.
And so it's not just that you're visibly seeing something different. You're also hearing it differently. You're hearing the ideas of the text differently. And I think that there's a learning curve, as weird as that might sound.
Yeah.
There's a learning curve to being able to hear it well.
Yeah. And so I think for a chapter like this, when you've been told like what it means for so long, and so you're just like, this is what a good wife is, we break these things down, and I can see people being like, no, like that's not what that means, because it's hard to overcome that. So anyway.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Sarah?
No.
Done.
I recently did a teaching at a church, and I talked about how they used to do this Cracker Jack box where you would take out a decoder and you put the screen over top of something, and you'd be able to see what the writing was. But if you didn't use the screen, it just looked like a bunch of smeared stuff, right? And I think that smeared stuff is the way a lot of the Bible has been taught and translated. And it obfuscates the actually what was written, and that we then need another thing to put over top of it to get rid of all of that stuff that is meant to make it muddied.
Yeah.
I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is we end up throwing away the sheet that is muddied altogether, because we say, well, it's all bad.
Yeah.
And really what we need to do, and what I hope that we are doing somewhat with AJFF, is helping people to find that decoder thing that goes over top, that allows you to see through all the junk that has been piled on top of the Bible for all these years, all the mess that it's made of the text, and to actually be able to see a text that is clear, is beautiful. And I want to be careful with clear, because I don't mean that it's simple.
Right.
But that it's the text that's underneath all that muddying is really beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think this section of the text is really beautiful.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's an important thing for us to keep in mind, is that oftentimes when we have a passage that is gross, there's a better chance than not that it's the muddying from years of poor teaching.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitic teaching, anti-women teaching, or white supremacy teaching, whatever it might be, that a lot of those teachings have muddied the text. And I hope that this is a place where you can find some lenses that help clear it up.
Yeah. I love that. That's a great way to put it. I feel like that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something you say every episode.
Maybe I need to come up with a new line. No, but
that's the way the cookie crumbles.
And now you know the rest of the story.
I gotta find one of my own. I want to add to that. That's something that has been a lot on my mind lately, which is really trying to find the ways to help people study study the Bible and remove all of those layers. I mean, a lot of people call that deconstruction, like you're taking down all the things that have been constructed around the texts that they're not good. We've talked about it as an excavation, like kind of digging past all these misinterpretations and uncovering what's really there. And so I don't know, lately I just feel like this is more and more important of a project, as it feels like a popular version of Christianity is just twisted and it's loud.
Yeah.
And it's harmful.
The rabbi said that a hedge around Torah is good, but sometimes you build the hedges so high that they collapse and destroy the very thing they were meant to protect.
Yeah.
And I think that we're experiencing a time in history within Christianity that the hedges have collapsed.
Yeah.
And I think there's still something of value underneath all of that collapse. And I hope that we're able to be a part of the journey for people.
Yeah.
To get to that.
Me too. Any final thoughts beyond that? I don't want to cut anyone off.
No.
You good? All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for joining us. I loved this discussion. And go be women of valor. Bye.
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 Hey, thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about AJFF, you can go to ajffpodcast.com, and from there you can find more episodes, links to our socials, and more. You can also look us up on YouTube with the handle @AJFF. Also, if you really liked what you heard today, we invite you to subscribe, rate, and review, as that will help us get in front of more people. And finally, if you'd like to support the work we do, please go to buymeacoffee.com/AJFF, and you can become a regular supporter or just leave us a tip. Thanks.